share my screen. Can you give me a thumbs up when you can see my screen? Sometimes it delays.
I can see it.
You can see it? Okay. All right, so in geometry, you learned about right triangle trig a little bit. So when you have a right triangle, I'm going to slide this over actually. We have these different ratios of sides to angles. So you guys learned about sine, cosine, and tangent back in geometry. So I want to review those, and then we're going to introduce these other three that you might not have even knew existed. So down here, I just want to write out the long version. So if you see this, it's not pronounced sin, it's sine, which is actually spelled with an E, but this SIN is just the abbreviation. When you see COS, that is an abbreviation for cosine. And then TAN, that's an abbreviation for tangent. And then this CSC, that's a new one. So CSC represents cosecant. And then SEC is an abbreviation for secant. And then COT is an abbreviation for cotangent. And today is going to feel like totally separate from all of the other stuff we were doing with the circle and all the angles. It all relates. It all comes back together. It really does, but you don't see the whole big picture yet. You'll see that more next year in Algebra 2. Okay, so back to sine. Sine of theta, theta is an angle. That is the relationship between the opposite side and the hypotenuse. So if we're looking over at our triangle, and here's our angle, it's always in reference to whichever angle you're talking about. So I'm going to be focusing on this angle instead of the angle up here at the top. But if I'm focusing on this angle right here, then this would be the opposite side, directly across from the angle. The hypotenuse is always across from the right angle, always. So then that means that this side would be the adjacent side. Adjacent means next to, it's next to the angle. Now I know the hypotenuse is also next to that angle, but the hypotenuse is designated as specifically across from the right angle. So that has to be the hypotenuse. And this is opposite the angle, so that means this one's the adjacent one. So sine is the ratio, the relationship between the opposite side and the hypotenuse. And then cosine of theta is the relationship between the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. And then tangent is the relationship between the opposite side and the adjacent side. So my guess is you might remember SOHCAHTOA. You guys had Mr. Gross last year, right? You can unmute yourselves. Did you have Mr. Gross? Did he show you this? I'm imagining you did, sine, cosine.
Yes, I believe he did.
Yeah. So do you remember this little kind of, I don't know, acronym? Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And then cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So these are the first letters. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, so then these guys are the new ones. Yeah.
How is the theta going to be labeled every single time on the
Yep.
triangle?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we don't have to figure out what that is.
Nope. Nope.
Okay.
I'll tell you a specific angle to look from, and then you'll be able to label your triangle according to that angle. I've got some examples coming up with numbers, so that I think will answer your question more. Okay, so these guys are the new ones, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. These are reciprocals of these guys. So reciprocal, if you remember, that means you flip the fraction. So cosecant and sine are reciprocals of one another. So if I had opposite over hypotenuse, I just flip it and I do hypotenuse over opposite. So cosecant and sine, that's kind of why I have them written next to each other. They're reciprocals. And then secant and cosine are reciprocals. So if this is adjacent over hypotenuse, then I flip it and it'll be hypotenuse over adjacent. And then cotangent and tangent are reciprocals. So if I had opposite over adjacent, I flip it and now I have adjacent over opposite. So what we're going to do is just practice finding these for a given triangle where I give you all the sides and I'm going to tell you an angle to look from. And then all we're going to do is write these fractions. That's it. That's all we're doing today. We're not solving for anything, just getting the ratios, the fractions set up. So I would say either have this written down or maybe right now take a quick screenshot of it, or take a picture with your phone, or if you don't have time to do any of that, then maybe you can rewatch the video later and then write it down later. But you're going to need these for the homework. Yeah.
So I remember doing SOHCAHTOA, but can you remind me on how to, like, what the abbreviations are? Like, I see them on the screen, but I just can't. I'm just really confused.
So the S stands for sine, and then the O is for opposite, and the H is for hypotenuse. So it's just the first letter in this relationship, SOH. Just to help you remember, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And then the C is for cosine, the A is for adjacent, and the H is for hypotenuse. So when you see this, you just say, oh, okay, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And then tangent, T for tangent, would be opposite, O for opposite, over adjacent, A for adjacent.
Okay.
Yeah. And then these three right here are you just flip whatever you got for these. So you just have to remember that the main thing you guys need to have remembered is that sine and cosecant go together. Cosine and secant go together, like they're reciprocals of one another. Tangent and cotangent go together. Because you'll need to remember which one is the flip of which one. So let's just practice with some actual numbers. Okay, so here's what your homework's going to look like. I'm going to give you a triangle. It's going to have all three sides given. It's going to have the angles labeled. I think all of them are ABC in the homework too. So we're just going to go through and we're going to find all of the trig functions for A, and then we're going to do them all for C. So they're different depending on what angle you're starting from. So we're going to start from angle A for these guys right here. And what I would suggest you do is you label your triangle according to that angle. So if I'm starting from angle A, then 32 is going to be the opposite side. And 40 has to be the hypotenuse because it's across from the right angle. So then that means that 24 is the adjacent side. And it's...
So are you allowed to pick whatever angle? So if you pick like C, Is that still right?
In general, yeah, but on the homework, I'm going to tell you what angle to use.
Okay.
But in general, you could solve this entire right triangle and you could go from the perspective of any angle, not B. It has to be one of these acute angles, A or C.
So would it be the same answer or would it give you different
You're going to
answers
get
then?
different answers. Yeah, so that's why I'm going to go through all of these and then we're going to switch to C and you'll see that they're different. I mean, they're using the same numbers, but they're going to be different.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay, so sine of A, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So that means that we're going to take the opposite side from A, which is 32, and divide it by the hypotenuse, which is across from the right angle, which is 40. And then reduce your fractions if you can. So this one is going to reduce down to 4/5. Some of the ones on the homework are not going to reduce, and that's fine. But if it can reduce, you should. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So again, I have it labeled, which is helpful. So the adjacent side is 24 and the hypotenuse is 40. And then that will reduce as well to 3/5. So on the homework, you would type in 4/5 in the answer space, or you would type in 3/5. Okay, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that means I'm going to take 32, which is the opposite side, and divide it by 24, which is the adjacent side. And that also reduces, and it reduces down to 4/3. Okay, so now with these last three, cosecant, secant, cotangent, if I remember that cosine is the reciprocal of sine, then I can just look at what sine was and flip it. So flip 4/5, you get 5/4. The longer way to do it would be like going back here and seeing, okay, it's hypotenuse over opposite. So that would be 40 over 32, and 40 over 32 reduces down to 5/4. You could do it that way too. I just think it's easier if you recognize cosecant and sine are the reciprocals of one another. So whatever sine is, just flip it and you get cosecant. And then secant pairs up with cosine. They're reciprocals of one another. Maybe I'll make it like this so it's easier to see. So they're reciprocals of one another. So I just take cosine and flip it. So take 3/5, flip it, you get 5/3. And then tangent and cotangent are reciprocals of one another. So tangent was 4/3, just flip it, you get 3/4. But again, just wanting to say this one more time, for like cosecant, let's say, I could go the longer route and say, okay, cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite, and write that out if I want. And then go over here, hypotenuse is 40, opposite is 32, and then reduce that down. It'll reduce down to 5/4. I can do it that way too. So whatever you're more comfortable with, go for it. I don't care. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to change the angle. So now our focus is going to be from angle C. So I'm going to erase these because they're going to change a little bit. So now we're going to go from the perspective of angle C. So that changes what's opposite. Now 24 is the opposite side. 40 is still the hypotenuse because it's across from the right angle. That will never change. But that then means that 32 is the adjacent side. So the opposite and the adjacent side switched. So that's what I do, whatever angle I'm told, I look for the side opposite of it. label that. The hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. I label that, and then the leftover side, that's the adjacent side. So now if we do sine of C, sine again is opposite over hypotenuse, but this time the opposite side is 24. The hypotenuse is still 40. So this reduces down to 3/5. So do you see how sine of C is not the same as sine of A? Sine of A was 4/5. Sine of C is 3/5. So you're going to get different answers depending on what angle you're looking from. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So this time adjacent to C is 32. So 32 over 40. That will reduce down to 4/5. And then I just keep going through the whole thing. So tangent of C is opposite over adjacent. Opposite of C is 24. Adjacent is 32. And that will reduce down to 3/4. And then for the rest of these guys, just remember cosecant is sine flipped. So take 3/5, flip it, you get 5/3. Secant is cosine flipped. So take 4/5, flip it, you get 5/4. And then cotangent is tangent flipped. So take 3/4, flip it, you get 4/3. So once you get the sine, cosine, tangent figured out, the rest of them are pretty fast. That's really all you're going to be doing on the homework. But you're not going to probably, if I give you a picture, you're probably not going to find all of these. You're probably only going to find maybe 2 or 3 of them per picture. So let's just do, what do you guys think? Do you want to do maybe one group of these, or do you want to do both of them? It's a different triangle, but it's the same process. Anyone have strong opinions?
I think one group's fine.
Fine, okay. So let's do A then. So we're going to look from the perspective of angle A. So then what side is going to be the opposite side? Yep, straight across from the angle, that's the opposite side. The hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. So B is the right angle, go across from that. 45, that's your hypotenuse. So then 36 is your adjacent side. And then go from there. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. I'm just going to abbreviate it even more. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that'll be 27 over 45. And then that reduces, so that will be 3/5. And then cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So then that would be 36 over 45.
So if it doesn't reduce, like if it's 29 over 20, do you just put 29 over 2?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Some of them on the homework are not going to reduce. Actually, I think most of them on the homework do not reduce. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think the last few do, if I remember the order right. So tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that'd be 27 over 45. And then that would be, did I do that right? Tangent. Nope, I did not do that right. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that'd be 27 over 36. So that would reduce down to 3/4. All right, and then these last three, just flip the first three. So cosecant goes with sine, so flip 3/5, so that'll be 5/3. Secant goes with cosine, flip that, flip the 4/5, you get 5/4. And then cotangent goes with tangent, flip that, you get 4/3. So, you know, like if I gave you this problem and I only asked for cotangent, you could find tangent and then flip it. Or you could go back to the very beginning. Oops, not there. Go back to the very beginning, cotangent, we wrote down that relationship is adjacent over opposite. So you could do it that way as well. So you could say, okay, cotangent is adjacent over opposite, and the adjacent side's 36, and the opposite side's 27, and then you reduce that down, and you can get your answer that way as well. Whatever way you want. So do you guys want me to do this last one, or do you think you're all right? Good to go? What do you think?
I get it. I understand it.
Okay. Kate, how about you or Nicole?
I'm okay.
You all right? Okay. Jack, you all right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I will